The 1,800-foot-high CN Tower dominates the Toronto skyline from many angles. The spire of St. James Cathedral, 1/6 as tall, did much the same. Once upon a time,
it was a small parish, and it's gone through 4 or 5 incarnations, different buildings, until the one that we're sitting in now was built in 1852.
Show up Sunday morning, 100 feet up in the tower, to see and hear the St. James Cathedral Guild of Change Ringers, manipulating ropes to ring a dozen bells as a modern version of a medieval call to worship.
Change ringers are a breed unto themselves, and change ringing is a kind of physical Sudoku. It's a very complicated operation, but these people are passionate about it.
Then, at 11, the long procession of white surplices over red cassocks signals Anglican Episcopal worship of the highest liturgical order. As I learned firsthand, Sunday morning worship is a wonderful experience here at St. James, but fairly predictable for the churches planted around the world by the British Empire. Totally unpredictable is what happens here on Tuesday afternoons.
In a world where many are hungry, and many are lonely, thank God for food, friendship, and each other. Amen. Thank you. Okay, you first.
Canon David Brinton, Vicar of St. James, with the opening prayer of the Tuesday drop-in, when the west aisle of this grand church becomes a different kind of sanctuary for people living on the streets or on the margins in this city, which is now an international business capital. Gloria Weeb, the parish nurse, seems to be in the middle of everything.
They deserve a good chance to have their healthcare needs met, their spiritual needs, to receive support from a community that can embrace them. And they often do not have a community. And we feel that the St. James Cathedral provides a community for them.
While a volunteer pianist fills the space with music, barbers, hairstylists, and nurses provide free services for at least 100 people. There's hot soup, along with other snacks, Bible study, even an opportunity for folks who live on the street to get out of the city on a nature hike.
There would be volunteers who worked with them as friends and support. That has been the image that has driven it.
Some of the St. James parishioners who work each week at the drop-in also participate in a weekly prisoner visitation at a Toronto jail.
Sometimes we get negative feedback from the officers because they will say to us, how many people have you saved today? And sometimes they are referred to as slime. And yet we have to see them as God's creations, as people who have a soul, who have a heart, and who need to find, at this time, some reason to hope.
After their Monday afternoon visit behind the walls, Gloria Weeb and her team gather at a local tea shop and share their observations and feelings.
Well, yes, he admits to addictions. But what's going to come of him? It's a draining experience. If there were some crises that we had to deal with or some difficult situations that we talk about it.
St. James Church dates from 1797, just 4 years after this city, then called York, was born on what was strictly North American frontier.
People came here after the American War of Independence. Loyalists came here and they settled. And it would have been pretty bleak. You were on the shore of Lake Ontario. They were looking for forts that would be able to protect this part of British North America.
The first worship services happened inside Fort York. The first St. James was a wooden church painted blue. The city, renamed Toronto from the First Nations language, began to grow as the capital of the colony called Upper Canada, and the site of the largest whiskey distillery in the British Empire, of which some evidence still remains. To get a sense of how St. James history parallels Toronto's, I took a walking tour of the 165-year-old cemetery of St. James the Less, a couple of miles from the church. A man named William Cooper was one of the first buried here. His body moved from the churchyard in the 1840s. Also here, a common grave for some of the Irish immigrants who died in a typhoid epidemic in 1847, after fleeing to Toronto to escape the potato famine. As we walk around here and as we walk around the city, it's really like St. James is connected with everything.
It is.
About the history of this city, really.
I say that St. James is the most historic building in Toronto, not only because of its age, and it goes back to the first service, really, but because of all the things that started in the cathedral itself in the years since.
Back in those days, the Church of England, you could call it the official state religion of this province. Everybody else was sort of rung down the ladder.
That status as a high Anglican church is still a draw. Queen Elizabeth II worshipped here in the summer of 2010. And St. James' legacy seems to be everywhere you look. This church is the place where Canada's two prestigious Anglican seminaries began.
The earliest was Trinity College, which is an Anglican university associated with the University of Toronto. Likewise, Wycliffe College. And so we're very comfortable with both being supporters of Trinity as well as of Wycliffe. We try to drop anchor in the heart of the Anglican communion and not in its edges or peripheries.
Toronto's status as a world financial center draws young people from around the world seeking their fortune. But Wycliffe College reports a recent hopeful phenomenon, an increase in 20-something seminarians.
I wanted to know about God, so I applied to school and started going, and then as God leads, slowly but surely, He revealed to me that I would be a priest, which is news to me. 5 years ago I would have said, no way.
My father is a Southern Baptist pastor, and I became an Episcopalian when I was doing my undergrad, and so it's a very exciting time to be in the church as well. I think it's a point where the challenges that the church is facing it's kind of requiring the church to rediscover what the gospel actually means.
Well, remember what we said about St. James being unpredictable. This is a place that's not afraid to adjust on the fly. Case in point, the appearance Sunday morning of dozens of retired members of the Royal Military Association.
They came to us and said, can we come to church that day? And we said, of course. Can we bring our flags? Certainly. Can we lay a wreath? We would love it. That is the kind of openness that we try to promote.
But there's also the sense that at its heart, St. James is a parish with a really personal touch. The memorials on the walls are all about families and poignant life events, such as the death of a toddler or a son killed in a far-off war. On Sunday morning, while hundreds take the bread and wine of communion at the main altar, a few dozen kneel in a side aisle for a simple healing service.
You never know exactly what people are going through. You always have to connect with people directly.
And perhaps the greatest example of that is the Tuesday drop-in, the weekly tradition that says everybody is welcome in this church, whatever their need.
I find it profoundly moving in a sort of a neo-Gothic building like this, people being ministered to and helped, their feet being cleaned. I think it takes us pretty close to the heart of what the gospel is all about.
On a rainy morning during our last day at St. James, we got a tour of the parish house, which dates from 1909 and is being renovated to the tune of $16 million.
Program aspects of the drop-in will take place in the basement, and the food will be served for the drop-in upstairs in the parish.
When the completed project gets its new name, Cathedral Center, it'll have church offices, staff apartments, and a lot more room for ministries such as the Tuesday drop-in, which will then serve about 200 persons a week and will include hot meals. Most important, this new building will symbolize the commitment of St. James to the people of Toronto for a third century here.
The message that Jesus Christ can transform us, can transform our communities, and through our communities transform indeed the world.